Hello everybody, welcome to another watercolor tutorial. We are going to be painting this beautiful, beautiful mystical scene, and well, we'll see if you'll even see this this painting, because I saw just the most beautiful photo on the internet, and I'll link my my reference in, or I'll include my reference in the description. But I just felt like I had to try and paint this. So as I've said in previous tutorials, I don't watch videos too often of other tutorials. I just see pictures or paintings on the internet and I try to replicate the design just from looking at it. So that's exactly what I'm doing today. So what I started doing, I just covered my entire piece of watercolor paper with a layer of water using a mop brush. Linked in the description, as always. Just make sure that there's no pooling and the water is evenly spread. And now we're just going to be creating the background mood, I guess you could call it. So I'm taking some blue watercolor and I'm just painting it across the sky. I'm going to add a little bit of pink. I'm going to fade that pink into kind of like a nude color, and then add a little bit of yellow in there. And then I'm going to spread that together, sort of. Like so. And you can barely see that. I'm going to take a little bit more blue, and about just below halfway down, I'm adding a little bit more of that blue. I'm fading it. It's a little bit too dark there. I didn't want that to be as pigmented there, but I'm fading that into that nude color, and finally into a yellow. And I'm just doing this because I want some pigment or like some color on certain parts of my painting. And you'll know what I mean later on. Whoops, you may have not seen that bottom part, what I just did there. But okay, I'm happy with the color arrangement, but I'm not happy with the opacity of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint, or at least attempt to paint the same colors, but a little bit darker. So it's much easier if you just watch the colors that I'm using. You don't have to use the same colors I'm using, by the way. Like, you can totally experiment with your own combinations. I'm just trying to follow the photo that I saw, which now that I'm looking at it, it does not look at all similar to it. But you know what? That's the beauty of painting. Like, it doesn't have to be identical, and it'll be unique in its own way, its own light. And that's another reason why I don't think you need to know the exact color names of paints that artists use. Just use whatever you have around. So that is about okay. I suppose I did want this to be a little bit more yellow, so I'm just gonna add some yellow pigment in there, like so. And then down below here as well, I just wanted some yellow highlights. Okay, so we're gonna let this completely dry before we move on to our next step. Okay, now that it's mostly dry, hopefully totally dry, we're going to start our second layer. So for this layer, I'm going to be using black and kind of yellow tones as well. So I'm mostly taking yellow here, and then I'm adding a little bit of black to darken it to a point that it looks like black, but it still kind of looks like yellow as well. And I'm going to take that and start painting, like it's gonna look like there are trees in the distance on this misty mountain. So about a third way up, I'm going to go ahead and start painting my trees here. And it's not going to be super majorly detailed here. We are going to have a few trees that are detailed and sticking up and peaks and whatnot. But a lot of it is just going to be kind of this mishwash of stuff. And you can alternate here between yellow and then that yellow black as well for the when you're painting the peaks of the trees. And this is because we have the sun coming from here, so it's kind of illuminating our horizon, or not horizon, but the treetops, that's what I meant to say. So you do want to work fairly, not necessarily quickly, but quick enough that your paint doesn't dry, because then it'll ruin the effect. So what I'm going to do actually is a little bit further down, I'm just going to paint, I wanted it to be white, but there's still yellow on my paintbrush. So I'm painting a line here, and my horizon is just going to fade into this line. And then I'm gonna extend that line down quite a bit. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that kind of darkish yellow color and paint it across. Whoops, that's not what we wanted. Actually, I kind of like how that turned out. I just want to fade this out as best as I can. So here I'm painting on that horizon, And I'm kind of dotting with my size 14 Grumbacher brush. And as I'm dabbing it, you can see that that ink, or not the ink, the pigment is fading into that wet part that we painted. And I just noticed that there seems to be this yellowish background tinge. So I'm painting that first, and then I'm going to paint the dark features over top. Like so. I'm gonna just zoom in here so that you have a better idea of what I'm painting. I do want some brighter yellow here, not just that kind of darkish yellow. So you can either follow the pattern of pine trees that I'm painting, or you can continue this sort of rough shape all the way. It doesn't really matter. I always try to encourage you guys just to paint what you feel like painting. You don't have to paint the exact same thing, the exact same order that I'm painting in. Just explore, enjoy the process. You never know what your painting turns out like, what it might turn out like if you just follow your intuition and what you want to do rather than what's being instructed in a tutorial. Like you have the basics, you see the process that I'm using, but then apply your own ideas to it, your own techniques. Like you don't have to paint pine trees the exact same way I'm painting them. You might have your own style. Use that style. It might suit the painting so much more than what I'm doing. Trying to just get rid of that yellow pigment and add a little bit of blue to my brush without it looking green. Here I'm just extending the water up to what I painted because I don't want that cauliflower effect to take over. Honestly, I'm not really a fan of what's happening right now with this painting. I'm gonna zoom out because I'm not sure if you could even see what I'm doing fully. But see, that cauliflower effect is now extending upwards. Not a fan of that. So I just kind of used black and splatted it on in the rough shape of the trees that I painted here, but like mirroring it, obviously. We'll just go with that. And while this is still wet, I hope it is, I am going to take that black again, and we're just going to go on top, like overlapping slightly the yellow part that we painted. And I want that to bleed downwards. Like so. And this part here, I'm going to extend some of those trees upwards, so that it's not just this blotch. I'm just using like a liner brush to break up some of the sections so they don't look super harsh there. That's just what I was doing with this paintbrush. So that looks kind of mystical there, I hope, enough. So we're gonna let this completely dry, and we're gonna move on to the next layer. Okay, so I'm hoping that this is mostly dry at the bottom here. This is still wet, which is okay, because we're just gonna be adding some details in the foreground here. So I'm taking my original yellow once again, surprise, surprise, and I want to water it down a little bit, and I'm going to be, how do I explain this? Making the illusion that there is foliage growing here. So it doesn't have to be anything extremely representative of foliage. Like, this doesn't really look like very much, and that's okay, because we're going to be going over it later with much darker values, both yellow and black, although we'll see, I changed my mind a lot. We just want this yellow background there as a base so that it looks like the sun is reflecting off of some of the foliage. So just kind of lay a groundwork of very light yellow tinted foliage, just sort of blotchy like I did there. I'm gonna add a little bit more of a yellow opaqueness rather than this shadow of yellow. And then on top of that, I'm going to take some orange, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. I can do it on top of some of the yellow so it's overlapping. I could have some individual orange foliage strikes or streaks. And I'm just noticing now that there seems to be this cloud at the bottom here. It might be a little too late for me. It's pretty light. It's like probably 1/2 centimeter wide at the very bottom here. It's just this pale haze. So I'm trying to lift off the color as much as I can, and then I'll fix it. I'll touch it up. So now I'm gonna drag that into what I painted so it's not like this white line. Okay, and now I'm gonna take the black. Technically we should wait, but I want the black to fade into this haze that we're painting. So we will be going over the black with much more pigmented black in just a moment. But I do want to get just that hazy line down. All right, so let's let that completely dry, unless, oh, actually this is already dry for me, so I'm gonna move on, but you do want the top part to be dry before you move on to this next part. We're gonna be painting the pine trees. So I'm taking very pigmented black here, and I'm going to start my first one. It's gonna kind of go up to here, I would say. That's probably a good point. And I'm gonna zoom in so you have an idea of how I'm painting this pine tree. So I'm kind of just creating a point and then creating these very irregular lines on either side. And then about 1 inch down, I'm starting to extend those lines a little bit wider, and they don't have to be identical on every side. So as I'm getting further, I'm now starting to curve my lines a little bit and then add these pine features of the lines swooping downwards a little bit. And we can just add some vague details here, and then another swoop with more lines coming down. And this is a little bit different to the technique I usually do with pine trees. I'm just trying to follow the picture that I have in front of me. So, and this is how they've painted it. So that is what I'm doing as well. I actually quite like this technique. Maybe I should do an updated pine tree tutorial video, which if you haven't checked out already, please go check it out. I go over 4 different techniques or ways to paint pine trees that would really help you out in this painting if you don't really have too much experience with painting pine trees, because this is just one technique, but I would say it's a tiny bit more advanced because you have to know how to not care about your brush strokes. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. It's just very irregularly placing your brush strokes so that they create this effortless illusion of a distant pine tree or whatnot. And it's just knowing, like intuitively knowing where to put brush strokes. And honestly, you just gain that with experience. Like the more you paint, the more you'll get to know how to paint these details so that they look realistic. You want to avoid very intentional lines because then it stops looking realistic. And I'm just swooping my trunk of the tree downwards like that. And you can do that ahead of time and use it as a guide, the trunk, where to paint, but definitely not necessary. And I'm just using my size 14 Grumbacher here for this. I was originally contemplating using one of my liner brushes, but this is actually working quite well because because it's thick, I have to be less caring of where I put my brush strokes. It's really hard to explain the technique that I am utilizing right now. It just comes with experience and painting pine trees very, very often, which I do because I love painting pine trees. They are just my favorite. So I'm going to zoom back out because I think you kind of got the idea there. I am going to go in with a liner brush and just add some details that I could not achieve with my size 14. So just some thin lines for the tippy points of the branches. That's mostly what I'm just doing here. Maybe adding just some fine lines coming down. But again, keeping it very loose, not intentional. So that's nice. That's a little bit better there. One thing I'm gonna do, because now I'm looking at my photo, I can see that that's what they've done. I'm taking some orange that's mixed with a little bit of yellow so that it's not as orange. And on the side here, I'm just dabbing my paintbrush in a way that it, again, very unintentional, creating this illusion of leaves. And then going down the side of my piece of paper here. And you can apply different values. And this is just supposed to be some random like tree coming from the side, but I just want to, it's nice. It's like extra color that you're adding to your painting. So I think I'm okay with that. So now I'm going to be painting another pine tree on this side, but before I do that, since this is wet, I'm going to go in with my black again on this first tree and just roughly go over the same branches again, but I'm trying to create like darker brush strokes, add more darker values to the tree, because right now when it dries, like you would know, when watercolor dries it fades a little bit. It's not as intense as when you originally applied it. So I'm just going over the same lines, trying to be careful to not make those lines very intentional. And I actually like this look because you can see some of the original brush strokes underneath, so it kind of makes it look like this shadow effect, if you will, which is actually what the original picture that I'm looking at has. So I wonder if they kind of did the same thing where they weren't happy with the intensity of their painting, so then they went over it again. Either way, I like that much more. Okay. So now we're gonna do the second tree. I don't know, you know what, I think this is still wet, so I'm not gonna do the second tree. We can just skip that for now, and instead, we can start doing this bottom section that we prepared earlier. So now we're gonna be a little bit more intentional with our brush strokes, so we're not gonna, you know, create these random wishy-washy blobs. I'm painting lines, and then from those lines, I'm painting, I mean, you can do a variety of things. So I'm just gonna quickly switch to a liner brush here. And you could do leaves coming from it. Reeds, like, it doesn't really matter too much. We're just going to blend all of this together. And we want this to look very rugged and rough. And that's why we're being very jaggedy with our brush strokes, and just not as jaggedy as the first few layers, obviously, because that was just, you know, you didn't really know what you were painting there. But very jaggedy, rough. Not intentional, similar to the tree. So now what I'm going to do, I'm rinsing out, actually, I'm not going to use that same brush because it has way too much black pigment in it. But what I'm doing is I'm going over the bottom of that with a paintbrush that's been dipped into water and blending it out so that it doesn't end so harshly. I'm adding that black back in because I do want it to be intense. I don't want it to be gray, and I know it's going to dry gray, sort of like it did with the pine tree. So I'm just adding that back in. irregularly and it'll blend into that pale space there naturally. Okay, so we're starting the second tree here, and this one is going to be taller than the first one. So I'm extending it even past those first little, like the background mountains or whatever that was supposed to be. Doing the same thing where I'm just painting ambiguous lines and then ever so slightly extending them and painting pine tree looking branches. As this is drying, this pine tree, we are going to add a few details on this side because it's a little bit bare, and also they did the same thing on the picture that I'm looking at. So I'm taking some watered down yellow and I'm going ahead and adding that same like dabbing motion that I did on this side with this tree, and adding some ambiguous branches. Okay, once you have gone over your second tree with the darker features, you're all finished. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment down below what your favorite part of the process was. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.